Have you ever wondered why some relationships, despite their promise, leave you feeling drained and confused? Imagine walking through a garden where every flower seems to reflect your deepest desires, only to realize that the fragrance you're inhaling isn't your own, but a borrowed scent clinging to you, masking who you truly are. This invisible weight, this silent theft of your essence, often begins with something we rarely name: ego projection. It's a subtle shadow cast not by others, but by the restless parts of ourselves, reflected and distorted in the mirror of connection. Ego projection is the quiet thief of feminine liberation, because it hides behind a veil of intimacy. It's not the obvious villain yelling for control. Instead, it is the whispered story your psyche tells when it mistakes the other for the self. You see, within every relationship lives an unseen dance between the ego, our constructed sense of identity, and the raw, unacknowledged parts Jung called the shadow. When the ego is fragile or unresolved, it clings desperately to others, projecting its fears, desires, and unmet needs onto them. Suddenly, the person you love is no longer who they are but a canvas for your inner conflicts, and you become a character in a story written not by your true self, but by your ego's illusions. This projection breeds a quiet kind of imprisonment. The sovereign queen within you, meant to reign in self-possession and authentic power, becomes clouded. Her throne wobbles beneath the weight of these unconscious narratives. When your feelings, your truth, are filtered through someone else's ego, boundaries blur, and emotional sovereignty slips away like sand through fingers grasping for control. Have you noticed how sometimes you lose yourself, not in grand gestures but in small moments, where your intuition is questioned, your feelings dismissed, or your perception twisted? These are the subtle fractures where ego projection seeps in. To understand this, picture the ego as a mask forged in early wounds, family expectations, childhood survival, cultural imprints. It wasn't born to be authentic. It was crafted to protect. But protection turns to prison when the ego cannot distinguish between itself and the other. It's like a shadow play on a cave wall, where shapes appear real and terrifying, but the truth lies beyond the flickering light. This is where traumas echo lives, attachment wounds that clutch your spirit tightly, triggering neediness or mistrust. Those unseen cords tangle your emotional energy, making it ripe ground for manipulation and self-betrayal. Within this entanglement, the male and female unconscious collide. The feminine, with its deep longing for connection and validation, sometimes unknowingly attracts ego-driven partners who mirror their unresolved shadows, dominance cloaked in charm, control masked as protection. The unconscious dance can feel magnetic yet corrosive, like being drawn to fire even as it burns. The task, then, is to awaken from this trance, to witness without judgment the cycles that keep replaying, the scripts that are not your own but inherited, repeated from generation to generation. The Stoic whispers here speak to what can be controlled, the sovereign choice to recognize projection when it arises, to reclaim the inner calm amid relational storms. It's an invitation to step back from the whirlpool of confusion and ask, whose voice am I hearing? Is this my truth or a reflection of my own shadow cast onto another? This discernment becomes a shield, allowing the conscious weaver within to untangle threads of identity from illusion, weaving a tapestry that honors both vulnerability and strength. Establishing boundaries is the art of sovereignty made visible. It means learning to say no to energy vampires who feast on your emotional clarity, and yes to your own rhythm and needs. Boundaries are not walls but the perimeter of your inner kingdom, fluid, respected, and fiercely guarded. In those moments when your truth is dismissed or your feelings are gaslit, remember that boundaries are the language of self-love, the first act of liberation from ego projection's silent siege. Imagine the moment when the dance changes. The haze lifts. The other is seen not as a savior or a mirror of your ego's longing, but as a separate soul walking their own path. And you stand firmly in your truth, no longer bending to the shadows cast by fear or need. This is not a victory declared loudly, but a quiet reclaiming of space inside your heart, a sanctuary untouched by the echoes of projection or manipulation. The question that lingers like twilight is this: how often have you found yourself lost in the stories others tell about you? And what would it feel like to step into the woman who sees clearly, holds herself gently, and chooses peace over chaos every time? What if liberation is not about breaking chains outside, but recognizing the silent chains within? In the quiet chambers of the psyche, where shadows gather like whispered secrets, ego projection quietly weaves its web. It is the unseen thread that tangles the heart in illusions of connection, binding you to others not through authentic presence, but through the echoes of unmet needs and unresolved wounds. This subtle distortion turns relationships into battlegrounds where power is masked as affection, and love is confused with control. The sovereign queen, radiant in her authenticity, faces a relentless adversary here, the shadow self masquerading as vulnerability. When the ego projects, it casts fragments of its own pain and fear onto others, turning them into actors in a drama that is not truly theirs. This dynamic fuels the endless cycle of codependency, where one sense of worth is tied to the approval or validation of another. Imagine a mirror cracked by time. What you see is a fractured reflection, impossible to piece together without understanding the source of the break. This fracturing is rooted deeply in early attachment wounds, the invisible scars left by caregivers who were absent, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable. These wounds shape the ego's desperate strategies to secure safety, control, people-pleasing, or emotional withdrawal. Yet these tactics only deepen the shadow's hold, blurring the line between self and other. In this haze, manipulation thrives because it feeds on confusion, making it harder to discern where your feelings end and someone else's begin. The male and female unconscious dance in this psychological theater with their own archetypal roles. The feminine often carries the longing to be seen and loved in her entirety, while the masculine, when shadowed, seeks to dominate or control, often unconsciously responding to his own fragmented identity. This interplay can mimic a magnetic pull toward imbalance. Like moth to flame, you find yourself drawn to what simultaneously ignites and consumes. It is the echo of a primal story that, without awareness, repeats endlessly. But the path to liberation begins when the sovereign queen recognizes the patterns not as personal failings, but as inherited stories needing unraveling. This is where the conscious weaver spins threads of insight into armor. By observing without judgment the moments when ego projection surfaces, you begin to separate your truth from the stories imposed upon you. This awareness is a subtle but powerful act of rebellion against the unconscious scripts that once held you captive. Boundaries arise naturally from this recognition. They are the sacred lines drawn not in anger or fear, but in quiet clarity and self-respect. Saying no becomes a declaration of inner sovereignty, an act of protecting the delicate garden where your authentic self blooms. It's not about building walls, but about honoring the rhythm of your emotional energy, knowing when to open and when to close, when to engage and when to retreat. Within this process, the wisdom of stoic calm anchors you. There is profound freedom in accepting what cannot be controlled, the behaviors, perceptions, and shadows of others, while mastering the one thing within your reach, your response. Resilience grows in these moments of stillness, when the noise of emotional chaos is met with the quiet strength of discernment. The sovereign queen learns to hold her center, unshaken by the shifting tides of external drama. The emotional cost of ego projection is often invisible until you begin to feel the depletion, not just of energy, but of selfhood. Have you ever noticed how some relationships leave you feeling smaller, less vivid, as if your colors have been muted? This is the slow erosion of your inner kingdom when you live through the projections of others. Recognizing this erosion is the first step toward reclaiming your sovereignty. Yet the question remains, a delicate, persistent whisper. What would it mean to live free of these invisible chains? To know yourself so deeply that the shadows cast by others cannot dim your light? The sovereign queen holds this possibility, inviting you to step into her realm, where power is not wielded over others but radiated from within. Liberation is not found in external conquest, but in the quiet mastery of your own emotional landscape. So, what part of your story is still being written by the projections of others? And what would happen if you claimed the pen to author your truth instead? What would it feel like to say, enough? Not as an act of rebellion, but as an embrace of your own profound dignity. There is a strange magic in naming what lurks beneath the surface, the silent thief of your freedom called ego projection. It creeps in disguised as love, as care, or even as protection. But its true nature is far more insidious, a demand for control dressed as connection. Imagine a rose whose petals slowly close, not from bloom but from suffocation. The delicate feminine spirit, yearning to unfold, is often pressed by these unseen forces, its fragrance stifled beneath layers of shadow. The unyielding sentinel within you is both guard and guide, standing watch at the borders of your inner kingdom. This archetype understands that liberation is not a moment of explosive rebellion but a steady, vigilant presence, a willingness to say no when boundaries are crossed, even if silently at first. The sentinel does not demand the world change. She changes herself to meet it, unwavering in the commitment to protect her emotional sanctum. To do this, she must first see clearly where ego projection distorts reality, when feelings are not truly hers, when blame is misplaced, when guilt is assigned unjustly. Jung described the shadow as everything we reject in ourselves, those darker traits, desires, and fears that don't fit the image we want to show. When the ego cannot bear these shadows, it projects them outward, often onto intimate partners. This means you might be carrying burdens that aren't yours, feeling attacks that are echoes of someone else's pain, and battling ghosts that live in another's past. The damage here is quiet but profound, because it seeps into the very core of identity, eroding self-worth and muddying the water where authenticity should swim free. This projection creates a dynamic of distortion and confusion, where the lines between victim and aggressor blur. You may find yourself playing roles written by invisible scripts, caretaker, martyr, rescuer, without knowing the origin of these parts. The trap is not in the roles themselves, but in the unconscious enactment that drains your energy and silences your voice. The unyielding sentinel learns to recognize these scripts, not with harsh judgment but with compassionate clarity. Only then can she begin to rewrite the narrative. The unconscious attraction to these dynamics often springs from early trauma patterns that shape attachment styles. When a child learns that love is conditional or inconsistent, the adult psyche yearns to fix what was broken through relationships. This creates fertile ground for narcissistic patterns to take root, where one partner's inflated ego demands admiration and control, and the other's fractured self seeks approval and safety. The result is a dance of gaslighting and emotional manipulation that chips away at the feminine soul's natural radiance. Yet within this complex interplay lies the power of emotional energy protection. To guard your heart is not an act of selfishness, but of sacred self-preservation. It means learning to recognize when your emotional boundaries are tested, when your feelings are minimized or weaponized. It is the conscious choice to shield your spirit from erosion, to nurture your inner light with kindness and strength. The unyielding sentinel is relentless in this devotion, her watchful eyes catching the subtle shifts that threaten peace. Here, Stoic wisdom offers a quiet refuge. In the face of others, projections and manipulations, the only true power lies in choosing your response. You cannot control how others cast their shadows, but you can refuse to wear them as your own. This is the foundation of emotional resilience, an inner fortress built not of walls, but of awareness, acceptance, and firm boundaries. The sentinel's power grows not from resistance to the world, but from the steady refusal to lose herself within it. Consider the exhaustion of living within projected realities, where your emotions are not honored but dismissed, where your identity is questioned or reshaped by someone else's fears. This silent drain often masquerades as relationship fatigue or confusion. The question then becomes, how long will you allow your sovereignty to be eclipsed by the shadows cast from another's ego? How will you answer the call to stand guard over your heart, to reclaim the space that is yours alone? In the stillness of this recognition lies the first breath of freedom. It is not the clamor of dramatic confrontation, but the steady flame of presence that does not flicker in the winds of manipulation. What would it be like to embody this unyielding sentinel fully, to guard your emotional borders with fierce tenderness and unwavering clarity? How might your relationships transform when you no longer absorb projections, but reflect only your true self? In the deep forest of the psyche, where tangled roots of past wounds intertwine with the present, the conscious weaver begins her work, delicately disentangling the threads of ego projection that bind the heart to illusions. This archetype understands that liberation is a process, not a sudden awakening. She moves with intention, gathering insight from the shadows, weaving them into a fabric of self-awareness that both protects and empowers. Each thread she untangles is a revelation, a moment where the false stories about self and other dissolve, making room for the authentic woman to emerge. Ego projection thrives in the fertile ground of unconscious patterns, where the self has yet to claim its full light. It hid. Ease in the spaces where unmet needs linger, longings for acceptance, safety, and love that have been confused with surrender or sacrifice. This confusion feeds the shadow dance between control and victimhood. Often, the feminine spirit, conditioned to nurture and give, finds herself caught in these cycles, giving away power to maintain the illusion of connection. Yet beneath this giving lies a paradox. The more power surrendered, the less authentic the relationship becomes. Picture this: a tapestry woven from borrowed threads, colors and patterns not chosen by the weaver, but imposed by the hands of others. The conscious weaver gently unpicks these stitches, recognizing that to claim authenticity means to let go of the need to control or fix others. This process is not easy, for ego projection is seductive. It promises safety through illusion but delivers only confusion and loss. The task is to see clearly when the veil is lifted, and to trust the often quiet voice of inner truth. The dance of male and female unconscious continues in the realm of attraction, where shadows seek each other like magnets drawn to incomplete halves. The feminine yearning for wholeness can unknowingly attract partners who reflect fragmented ego states, those who seek to dominate or manipulate to mask their own shadows. This magnetic pull is ancient, rooted in primal survival patterns, but the conscious weaver knows that true liberation comes from breaking this cycle. It requires courage to see the reflection not as a savior or a captor, but as a mirror for growth. Within this awakening, Stoic philosophy offers a sanctuary. Focus on what is within your power, your perceptions, choices, and boundaries, and release what is beyond your control. Emotional intelligence becomes the loom on which this philosophy is woven into daily life. Recognizing when ego projection is at play allows you to pause, breathe, and respond with clarity instead of reaction. This space, small and precious, is where sovereignty is nurtured. Attachment wounds, gaslighting, and narcissistic abuse are the terrain where ego projection flourishes unchecked. The conscious weaver learns to read these patterns not as personal defects, but as signals, a map to navigate away from emotional traps. Boundaries become not just lines, but sacred spaces of self-respect. They tell the world, this is where I begin, and this is where I end. They protect the delicate energy of the feminine spirit from being consumed or distorted by another's unresolved shadows. There is power in this reclamation. When you learn to discern projection, you stop absorbing pain that is not yours. You reclaim emotional energy once scattered to soothe others' insecurities or silence your own. Liberation becomes a daily practice of choosing authenticity over illusion, presence over reaction, and peace over chaos. The conscious weaver holds this truth tenderly, knowing that the work of disentangling is ongoing but deeply worthwhile. Ask yourself, what illusions are still woven into your closest relationships? What borrowed colors have dulled your natural light? And what courage will it take to unravel these threads and weave a new story, one where you are the sovereign creator of your emotional reality? The path is not easy, but it is the only way to true freedom. The labyrinth of the heart is often shrouded in a fog of ego projection, where truth is distorted and the feminine spirit risks losing its way. This is the realm where the truth-teller steps forward, not with accusation, but with unwavering clarity and compassion. Her voice cuts through the noise of manipulation, gaslighting, and confusion, illuminating the shadows cast by projected fears and desires. She understands that liberation begins not with others, but with the courage to face the uncomfortable reflections within. When ego projection is at play, relationships become mirrors of inner chaos, where boundaries dissolve and emotional energy is siphoned away. The truth-teller knows that the stories told by the ego are often laced with deception, not only to others but to oneself. You may have experienced moments where your feelings were dismissed as overreaction or your perceptions questioned until you doubted your own reality. These moments are the battlegrounds where identity is contested and freedom is won or lost. Jung's insight into the shadow reveals that what we deny in ourselves, we see in others, often projected as blame or criticism. This projection creates a cycle of control and victimhood, where one tries to dominate to mask vulnerability, and the other submits to protect fragile self-worth. The feminine, especially when wounded, can find herself trapped in this dance, mistaking codependency for connection. The truth-teller's role is to name these patterns without judgment, offering a path out through awareness and self-honesty. Imagine standing before a distorted mirror, the image warped by layers of projection. The challenge is to look bay. On the surface, to see the true face beneath the reflections of ego's fear and desire. This requires emotional intelligence, the ability to discern when feelings and reactions belong to you and when they are echoes of another's shadow. It is a skill honed through mindful presence and the willingness to question your assumptions gently. The unconscious pull toward unhealthy relational patterns is often rooted in early attachment injuries, where love was conditional or inconsistent. These wounds create a hunger for approval that can blind the feminine to manipulation disguised as care. Narcissistic abuse and gaslighting are cruel manifestations of ego projection, designed to rewrite your reality and erode your confidence. The truth-teller's weapon is clarity, the relentless pursuit of truth within, even when it unsettles the familiar. Stoic philosophy reinforces this pursuit by emphasizing control over one's own mind and responses. The emotional storms provoked by others, Projections need not sweep you away if you anchor yourself in the calm harbor of your own discernment. This inner stillness allows the truth-teller to respond with strength rather than react with confusion, preserving emotional sovereignty even amid external chaos. Boundaries become a sacred act of truth-telling, a declaration of what is acceptable and what is not. They protect the self from being consumed by the projections of others, carving out space for authentic connection rather than control. Setting boundaries may feel like defiance or loss, but it is, in fact, a profound act of self-love and liberation. The truth-teller knows that peace cannot coexist with deception, whether from within or without. What if the freedom you seek lies not in changing others, but in refusing to carry their shadows as your own? What would it mean to claim your truth so fiercely that projections bounce harmlessly off your shield of awareness? The question hangs in the air. How long will you allow your reality to be shaped by others' ego stories? And when will you step into the woman who speaks truth to her own soul, unwavering and free? Power often hides behind the delicate veil of connection, weaving itself into the threads of relationship like a silent undertow. Within this intricate dance, the sovereign queen reigns, not through domination, but through the unshakable knowledge of her worth and boundaries. She embodies the fierce grace of one who has faced the shadows of ego projection and emerged sovereign over her own emotional kingdom. This sovereignty is not a gift bestowed by others. It is claimed through the quiet mastery of self-awareness and the courage to live authentically. Ego projection fractures the landscape of intimacy by turning partners into mirrors for unhealed wounds and unmet needs. The sovereign queen understands that these projections are not personal attacks but reflections of the other's shadows. She sees the patterns without losing herself in their pull. Imagine a crystal lake disturbed by ripples. Though the surface is distorted, the depths remain clear and still. In this clarity lies her power, the ability to discern between the projected storm and the steady truth beneath. Jung's teachings remind us that individuation, the journey toward wholeness, is the path out of projection's labyrinth. It requires confronting the shadow within, embracing the uncomfortable parts rejected by the ego, and integrating them into a fuller self. For the sovereign queen, this is not a solitary quest but a reclaiming of the feminine essence, rich with complexity and strength. It is a daily practice of choosing authenticity over comfort, clarity over confusion. This journey is complicated by trauma's imprint, the invisible scars left by early relationships that shape how the feminine relates to power and vulnerability. Attachment wounds often manifest as cycles of seeking approval or fearing abandonment, which ego projection exploits. Narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, and emotional manipulation are all shadows cast by this dynamic. Yet, within the sovereign queen burns a steadfast resolve to protect her inner realm from erosion, to guard the sanctity of her emotional energy with unyielding boundaries. Stoic wisdom becomes her ally, teaching that while the outer world may be chaotic and unpredictable, her response remains within her control. The sovereign queen cultivates an inner calm, a sanctuary where she can observe without being consumed by the turbulence. This calm is not passivity, but a powerful presence that commands respect, a quiet roar beneath the surface that holds firm against manipulation and control. Boundary setting is a royal decree, a manifestation of self-respect that others must honor or face distance. It is not an act of rejection but a declaration of what is sacred within. In this space, the sovereign queen invites authentic connection, relationships where power is shared, not seized, where vulnerability is met with care, not exploited. The quality of her relationships transforms when she no longer plays the roles scripted by projection, but chooses freely whom to let into her court. Yet the question lingers like a whispered challenge. How deeply have you dared to claim your sovereignty in the face of ego's illusions? How long will you allow the shadows of others to dim your throne? And what would it feel like to sit fully in the power of your authentic self, unshaken and radiant? The sovereign queen beckons. Will you answer her call? In the quiet sanctuary of the soul, the feminine essence longs for freedom, a liberation not granted by external forces but claimed from within. This yearning often collides with the invisible chains of ego projection, which bind the heart to distorted reflections of self and other. The conscious weaver knows this intimately, moving through the delicate process of disentangling truth from illusion, thread by thread, in the fabric of relationship. Ego projection is a shadow dance where the ego offloads its fears, desires, and wounds onto another, clouding perception and muddying connection. It turns genuine interaction into a distorted echo chamber, where feelings are mirrored back not as they are, but as the ego wishes them to be. For the feminine spirit, conditioned to seek harmony and belonging, this creates a perilous terrain, a labyrinth where authenticity is sacrificed for the illusion of acceptance. Picture the unconscious scripts playing out beneath the surface, patterns inherited from ancestral wounds, early attachment ruptures, and cultural narratives that diminish feminine power. These scripts draw the feminine toward partners who unknowingly reflect her shadow, creating cycles of codependency and manipulation. The conscious weaver recognizes these cycles not as curses, but as invitations to greater awareness and transformation. Within these patterns, trauma and gaslighting act as both mask and weapon, blurring reality and fracturing trust in one's own perceptions. Narcissistic abuse exploits the feminine longing for connection, twisting love into control and intimacy into entrapment. The weaver's task is to gently unravel these knots, tracing the threads back to their origins and reweaving the narrative with clarity and compassion. Stoic philosophy anchors this process, reminding that while external chaos may rage, the inner citadel remains sovereign. Control lies not in changing others or circumstances, but in mastering one's response, cultivating equanimity amid turmoil. Emotional intelligence becomes the loom on which resilience is woven, allowing the feminine to respond with discernment rather than reactivity. Boundaries emerge as vital tools, sacred lines drawn with tenderness and strength, protecting the delicate energy of the feminine spirit from being consumed or distorted. They are the language of self-respect, communicating clearly what is and isn't acceptable. Setting these boundaries may challenge old fears of abandonment or rejection, but the conscious weaver understands that true connection requires this clarity. As the ego's projections lose their grip, the feminine begins to reclaim her authentic voice and presence. Emotional energy once scattered in the fog of confusion is gathered and redirected towards self-care and empowerment. Liberation becomes a daily practice, a weaving of presence, truth, and choice that reshapes relational patterns into sacred dance rather than battle. The question now arises, which threads in your relationship still belong to others' shadows, and what courage will it take to unravel them? How will you weave your own story, one where the feminine is not fractured or borrowed but whole, radiant, and sovereign? The conscious weaver invites you into this transformative journey, where liberation is both the process and the prize. There is a certain stillness that descends when the shadows of ego projection begin to lift, a quiet clarity that pierces through confusion and doubt. The truth-teller's voice becomes a beacon, illuminating the tangled pathways of relationship dynamics where control and vulnerability entwine. This voice speaks not in condemnation, but with unwavering honesty, calling forth the feminine to stand firm in her reality amidst the shifting tides of others' projections. Ego projection often feels like an emotional fog, thick, disorienting, and relentless. It blurs boundaries and distorts perceptions, making it hard to distinguish your own feelings from the echoes cast by another's unresolved wounds. The truth teller understands that these moments of doubt are invitations to look deeper, to question the stories that have been accepted as truth. What if some of the pain, confusion, or guilt you carry is not yours to bear? What if the narrative you've been living is partially written by someone else's fears? This is the space where the shadow of control looms largest, fueled by unconscious needs to dominate or protect. When ego projection enters, the dance power shifts become subtle and pervasive. Gaslighting whispers, "You're too sensitive," or "You're imagining things." The truth teller recognizes these as distortions, attempts to rewrite reality and silence the feminine voice. It is in naming these tactics with clear-eyed compassion that freedom begins to stir. The interplay of male and female unconscious patterns further complicates this terrain. The feminine, yearning for wholeness and belonging, may unconsciously gravitate toward those who mirror her own shadows, dominance met with submission, vulnerability met with control. These cycles, once unconscious, become clearer through the lens of emotional intelligence and self-awareness. The truth teller invites you to witness these patterns without blame, holding space for healing rather than judgment. Stoic wisdom offers a grounding anchor. Focus on the inner citadel of your mind and spirit, the only realm truly within your control. Emotional storms provoked by others, projections need not sweep you away if you cultivate the calm eye within. This stillness allows the truth teller to respond with clarity and strength rather than reaction, preserving sovereignty even when the outer world trembles. Boundaries become acts of truth, simple declarations of what is and isn't acceptable. They protect the sacred space where your authentic self resides, untainted by manipulation or distortion. Setting boundaries may stir fears of abandonment or loss, but the truth teller reminds you that peace cannot coexist with deception, whether from within or without. So, what would it take to hear your own voice clearly again, to recognize when you are carrying another's shadow and choose to set it down? How might your life shift when you no longer live by the scripts imposed by ego's projections, but by the radiant truth of your own soul? The truth teller's question lingers. Will you dare to speak your truth and claim the freedom that comes with it? The threads of emotional manipulation weave a tapestry often invisible until its weight becomes unbearable. Within this intricate fabric, the unyielding sentinel stands vigilant, a guardian of the feminine spirit who refuses to let shadows claim her light. She embodies a resilience forged in silence and solitude, a quiet strength that shields the heart from the subtle erosions of ego projection. Her watchfulness is not born of fear, but from deep respect for the sanctity of her emotional energy. Ego projection is a shadow thief, stealing clarity by disguising itself as concern or love. It thrives in the cracks where boundaries have softened, where the feminine has yielded to the desperate need for connection or approval. The sentinel knows that these cracks are not weaknesses but invitations to fortify, to reclaim the ground beneath her feet. She listens for the faintest shifts, dismissal of feelings, denial of experience, twisting of truth, that signal the presence of projection's quiet assault. Jung's shadow teaches that what is rejected within ourselves is cast outward. When the ego cannot integrate its darkness, it projects onto others, creating relational dynamics that confuse and control. This interplay often results in a dance of victim and oppressor, a pattern where emotional manipulation is the silent weapon. The sentinel recognizes these roles not as permanent identities, but as cycles to be broken through awareness and boundary setting. Attachment wounds lay the foundation for this dance, creating unconscious scripts that lure the feminine toward partners who reflect her own unresolved shadows. Narcissistic abuse and gaslighting are cruel echoes of these early imprints, designed to fracture self-trust and deepen dependency. Yet, within the sentinel burns an unwavering commitment to emotional sovereignty, a pledge to protect the self from erosion by others' projections. Stoic philosophy offers refuge here. The only true control lies in one's response. The sentinel cultivates a calm center, an unshakable presence that observes without becoming entangled in the emotional chaos. This inner fortress is built not from resistance to the world, but from the steady refusal to surrender one's essence to it. It is a power that is quiet but undeniable. Boundaries become the sentinel's sacred ground, clear lines drawn with compassion and strength that safeguard the feminine spirit from being consumed or distorted. Setting these boundaries may feel like walking a tightrope between fear and freedom, but the sentinel knows that peace and authenticity require this courage. Each boundary drawn is a declaration. My emotional energy is mine to protect. The slow exhaustion of living under the weight of projections, shadows often manifests as confusion, self-doubt, and fatigue. The sentinel asks, how long will you carry the burden of others' unresolved pain? When will you stand firmly in the protection of your own heart, guarding the light that is uniquely yours? This question lingers, a sea. Lent summons to reclaim the strength within and refuse the erosion of your sovereignty. The sovereign queen rises, not from the noise of the world, but from the stillness of her own knowing. She understands that liberation is not a distant dream, but a present reality, born in the moment when ego projection loses its hold. This queen does not demand obedience. She invites presence, authenticity, and respect, reigning with a fierce gentleness that disarms manipulation and rewrites the narrative of power within relationships. Ego projection attempts to fracture connection by transforming the beloved into a reflection of unresolved shadows. Yet, the sovereign queen sees beyond this illusion. She knows that the dance of projection is a call to individuation, a beckoning toward wholeness that requires embracing the shadow within and releasing the need to control the outer world. This inner journey is her true throne room, where strength and vulnerability coexist in balance. Trauma and early attachment wounds shape the terrain of relationships, often scripting patterns of codependency and emotional entanglement. The sovereign queen recognizes these scripts as inherited, not defects, but opportunities for transformation. Narcissistic abuse and gaslighting may have cast long shadows, but within her burns a light that no projection can extinguish. She guards her emotional kingdom with boundaries that are as fluid as they are firm, creating space for genuine connection without surrendering self. Stoic wisdom anchors her reign. While the world may churn with chaos, her response remains sovereign territory. She cultivates an inner sanctuary of calm, a place where presence and clarity outshine confusion and fear. This calm is a potent force, a silent roar that commands respect and preserves her essence amid relational storms. Setting boundaries is her royal decree, an act of self-respect that shapes the quality of her connections. These boundaries are not walls but invitations, defining what is acceptable and what is not, inviting others to meet her in truth. When projections arise, she neither absorbs nor rejects them blindly, but holds space for authenticity to emerge, guiding relationships toward balance and mutual respect. The sovereign queen's question echoes softly but insistently. How deeply have you embraced your power in the face of ego's illusions? What would it mean to sit fully on your throne, radiant and unshaken, choosing peace and authenticity over the shadows cast by others? The Queen's call is clear. Will you answer and claim your liberation?